Sundance and Unity have a lot in common. We're both longtime supporters of independent creators, like many of you here. And we want to do everything we can do to remove barriers from creators so that they can tell more stories. Have any of you been to the New Frontier in the last few days? Nice, that's a good crowd. Me too. And I'm super humbled to say that 70% of that awesome content is made with Unity. It's like crazy. Stuff like Battlescar, Chorus, Spheres, and so many other great projects. I can't go list them all right now, but some really, really great stuff. The power of Unity's real-time engine is really like the worst kept secret ever created. Unity's being used across so many different industries, from Pokemon Go, the most downloaded mobile game in history, to visualizing Mars with NASA and JPL, and even learning how to perform heart surgery with a HoloLens. So let's take a step out of Park City just for a minute and see what creators around the world are doing with Unity. Tonight, we welcome you to our talk, Real-Time Film Production Takes Center Stage. For the next hour, we're going to host 3 different conversations with amazing creators, pioneers in the real-time revolution. And they're here to share with you guys what that really means. So let's kick things off with Isabel Riva, head of Made with Unity, and Chris Harvey, VFX supervisor from Oats Studios, to talk about real-time in film.
Thanks, Allison. Thanks for coming out and standing in line for those of you. It's kind of chilly out there. So I want to introduce Chris Harvey, that I met over a year ago, who's become a friend. Yep. And I was super intimidated the first time we met because, I mean, as a VFX supervisor, he's worked on really impressive films like Zero Dark 30, Chappie, but he was barefoot the first time I met him, so somehow that broke the ice. He's known as the Barefoot Soup in Vancouver. And today he works with Neil Blomkamp at Oats Studios, and they've got this really wonderful mission, which is to think out of the box as an independent studio, offer free content to their fans, and to try to experiment new storytelling ways and methods, techniques. So that kind of philosophy and mission was really in line with Unity. And we were excited to ask them to collaborate on the extending of this demo we'd made in 2016 called Adam. So Chris took it upon himself to create 2 other episodes in the story about a robot that is exiled and has to survive in a post-apocalyptic world. And he did it for the first time in Unity in real time. So we're going to start by showing you just a little clip of the results, or the what that looked like. Can we roll that, Amy? Thanks.
You want to know what you are? The mirror can tell you who you once were. She knows your histories, your crimes.
So that was amazing. Thank you. Between the 2 films we have online, you can see them on YouTube. They've got over 15 million views. We're very, very proud of this. And also, Oats Studios has many other short films online: Raqqa, Zygote, Firebase. But these ones were made in real time. And I want you to explain to us the difference of, the significance of what that means.
Sure. I mean, I guess in traditional sort of visual effects or animation, a single frame of your content, you're running either at 24 or 30 frames per second. A single frame may take upwards of an hour to render. And probably the easiest way for me to explain what real time is to just show you quickly. So if we can switch over to this computer. I'll just play a clip from one of them. And, we presented these on YouTube, and for our frames, we could render, like I said, a single frame in an hour on traditionally. We could render the whole film in an hour. But that still isn't what real time really is. That's just for us to create an offline render that we could stick on YouTube. What real time really is the ability to, have the movie live at any time at 30 FPS. With no barriers. So, I mean, literally at any time, it's live. The movie is fully live. You can look around it. That's what real time is literally having the whole film running live the whole time, from end to end while you're working on production at any stage of it, having it live.
Wonderful. That's incredible. So this is revolutionary. Not only is it rendering real time at the end of your production, but you have access to this kind of live instant feedback through the entire making of the film. And I want to know what kind of impact that had on your team, who were used to a more, let's say, a little more traditional VFX kind of pipeline. What was it like for them to have that kind of that kind of sort of instant feedback?
Yeah, I mean, for them, it was really a game changer. There's one of the artists. It was funny. We were asking, for feedback for you guys about, how's your experience going? This is kind of partway into production, and one of the lighters and look dev artists literally said, "Well, I actually kind of feel guilty working on this." And I was like, "Well, what do you mean you feel guilty working on this?" And he's like, "Well, I don't really feel like I'm working. It's just everything's too fast. I just feel like I'm playing all day long and getting paid to, because the feedback is that responsive." So, for a lighting artist or a look dev artist, there's no move something around and wait for the computers to crunch numbers and finally you get to see it. It's no different than grabbing a light in the real world physically and just moving it and seeing how it looks. And they're working live like that. Or an animator or someone who's building a model or an asset, typically, an artist has their kind of pigeonhole and they're working in whatever they're working in, and they don't always have a very good, clear picture of the whole project and how it all fits together. Right. At any time, any of them can, hit publish on whatever piece of the puzzle they're working on, and they can watch their component in it live, in context, throughout the whole film. And that completely changes the mindset of the artist. They have a much broader sense of what's going on. They can bring new creative ideas because they're not just looking at their little sliver. They get to see the whole thing. And everyone gets to be more involved that way. And it really does change the perception they have and the way the whole team works together.
So it's a lot less waterfalled and separated in departments, and you wait for your dailies and the comp comes out. I mean, everything's in one place. How early in your project did you get everything working in one place like that?
I mean, right away. Like, you want to get it into, in Unity, this timeline was kind of the backbone inside Unity that held our edit, and you want to get it in there as quickly as you can so that you do have this sort of live running film the whole time. And by live, I mean, you saw that, but it's not just that. You can be making creative changes at any time as well, and those are updating for everybody. So, we went out in our case and we digitized a real environment. We did real location scouting like you would in a real movie. Went out, digitized the whole world, brought that back, put it into Unity, and then we filmed the mocap looking through a camera, and it was weird because I just went out and took a bunch of pictures, and then on the mocap stage, you're looking through your virtual camera, and it feels like I'm back in this location in the desert. It was awesome, and you could experiment with things that you just normally couldn't. Originally we had the setting for the third film sort of at high noon, and high noon just is not the most aesthetic time of day to film in. It worked for the story, but we weren't getting sort of the aesthetic results that we wanted. And I asked Neil, I'm like, Neil, just, give me a couple hours to just try something. And he's like, okay. Not really knowing what I was going to do. And I went to one of the lighters and I'm like, you got an hour. I want you to output a time of day wedge. So render me the sequence at noon, at 2 o'clock, at 4 o'clock, at 6 o'clock. And an hour later, we had 4 different times of day, which I think we have a small little clip of. And this literally, from the idea of trying it to showing Neil, an hour later, we had this little piece of the film rendered at different times of day, and we could just say, well, let's make it 4 o'clock. That looks better than noon. And we made the change, and the whole film now is lit at that time of day.
So what might have been, weeks of trial and error now, sort of compressed, and then you're able to make big decisions quickly.
For sure, or not even that, because sometimes the impact that a request or an experimentation might take, so you don't even make the suggestion because that it's going to hurt some other area of production. So this just allows you that creativity to experiment where otherwise you may just choose not to because it's going to impact you, too badly.
So the efficiency that real-time bought you was this incredible margin of creativity. You could experiment.
Absolutely. Just like this, we were watching the film one day, Neil on, and he's like, I don't like this camera. And he's like, can we try something different? It's like, sure, let's just make a new camera. And, we happen to have a mocap stage, but you could do it, with an iPhone connected to your, whatever you want, like, and quickly shot a new camera and boom, that's in the film. Like you could make these changes, so far into the production, these creative changes that you normally you'd have to be so locked down. You just don't have the flexibility that you do with real time.
Was it long to train the team to get them up to speed on how to use Unity?
Definitely going in, it was a big concern because none of us had worked on in a real-time engine before. We'd all talked about it, for years, some of us, but we hadn't really ever tried it. And we only hired, I think, 4 experts in real time, and the rest of the team was literally just made up of the traditional VFX artists that had 0 experience. And it didn't take long for them to get up to speed. I mean, literally from Neil starting to write the script and the concept art to outputting the 2 films was 5 or 6 months, and that included everything, like all of the asset builds. Like I said, writing the script, coming with the story ideas, going to locations, building everything, lighting it, and it was very, very quick for people to get up and running, and really using tools that are old now.
I mean, you said 6 months for a couple episodes and everything from A to Z. But now, how long might it have taken you if you'd had a render farm and like a more traditional offline sort of pipeline?
I mean, it's hard to say. Like it's like I would say twice as long. The interesting thing about us getting into the real-time engine is not just the efficiency that you gain there in the production, because you do. I mean, the assets are assets. They're going to take as long as they take anywhere you do it. It's really not fundamentally that different. But once you get into shot production, things move so much faster and so much more fluid. But then, so we've got a huge efficiency saving there. But then beyond that, the exciting thing for us is that now that we are in this sort of live world that's existing live, there's new doors that are open to us that before wouldn't be, or you'd have to go through a huge amount of work to get those doors. At any time, if we wanted to make an episode 4 and it was shooting in one of those locations, our assets are done. We just go back, load it up on the mocap stage, and shoot another episode, and output it. If we wanted to say, just for fun with our audience, because that's part of, we try to work with our audience a lot at Oats. It's like, let's give them this thing and say, hey, fans, feel free to shoot your own cameras here, and you release an episode that's, the same content but different cameras. They can do that because it all exists live. If you want to make a VR experience, sure, it's already live. And everybody can render on their computer. You don't need the render farm like you used to. I mean, this literally, you saw it. It's running on a laptop, Yeah. The tech is just available. It's very mainstream. It's not something, super exclusive that, isn't available to the public. And we didn't hack it. I mean, this is Unity vanilla out of the box. This is Unity 6 months ago publicly released. It's old. Right. Things go fast, for sure.
this is exciting. Now, you touched on, the ability to have this kind of like, once the world is built in Unity in the project, you can go back, remix it, change your cameras, tell another story with the same assets. You can make a game from the film. You can maybe even launch into VR. Can you just say one thing about the little test you guys did in VR with the asset, the environment?
Yeah, just for fun, we were like, well, what else can we do with this? Like I said, these other doors, and it's like, well, let's just, switch the VR mode on, and one of our technical artists, wrote a couple little scripts so you could have the controllers do things, and we loaded up the environment in VR, and we had flashlights on the end of the things, and you could like look around the environment, make yourself giant and walk around it. Like, it was amazing how quickly, like literally it was a day or two, we could walk around the environment, explore it ourselves in VR. It was cool.
Wow. So what I want to do now is explain just how this was a full CG film, but Unity is also used for films that blend live action and animation, which you might know as VFX film. And I want to introduce our next guests. Adam Myhill is the head of cinematics at Unity. He'll be moderating a panel with Habib, Zargapour, and Wes Potter, Digital Monarch Media. I want to bring them up. I want to thank you, Chris. And yes. And we'll turn the page and explore how Unity can be used in another way.
Come on up. Hello. It's my real pleasure to introduce these two filmmaking pioneers. And I'm going to start with Habib. Habib has 2 Academy Award nominations, 2 BAFTAs, Visual Effects Society Award. He's been doing this for 20 years. He was at ILM and Electronic Arts and Microsoft, and you've built some amazing tools. You're the Chief Creative Officer for Digital Monarch Media. We're going to hear more about that company. And Wes, who's a great friend of mine. We go way back. Wes has been traipsing between Los Angeles and London, working on virtual cinematography on a number of films, which I think we should move to. Look at this. Look at the year these guys have had. These guys have built tools that did the virtual cinematography for Jungle Book, Blade Runner, Ready Player One. So my first question, because a lot of people don't know what virtual cinematography is, what did you guys make? What is this?
So virtual cinematography, the idea behind it is to bring the art back to the artist. For 20 years, maybe 30 years, we've been creating an industry to create extreme fidelity in graphics. We're seeing, you see the graphics in Jungle Book. It's just amazing. It's like it's photoreal. But to produce that requires, a small, not a large army, not a small army. So to do that, also a lot of in the past movies would have the camera work be done by artists in the back room, right? The director would definitely be involved, but it wasn't, the DP's hand on the camera necessarily, or the director's hand. So what we're doing is trying to create tools that allow directors to be front and center with their films again. So we get interactive work filming these digital characters as if it was a live production, as if it was just a practical film, and that's really what it's all about.
I want to give a quick history background, just because the story's never been told. We just kept it secret because of the companies we were with. But this stuff didn't happen overnight, and in 2003 I switched from ILM to EA, and that was my introduction to real time. And you should have seen the look on my face where I'm holding a controller and flying around these sets, mind you, on PlayStation 2s and very early tech. But I could immediately see how that could apply back to what I was doing. And all the time while at EA, we built this tool called the in-game camera engine, and that was what was used on Need for Speed and Skate and James Bond to edit all the cinematics, all using a controller. So then when I went to Microsoft, I pitched this to Phil Spencer, that we could deploy that technology for James Cameron as something he could use, have it be a high-end graphics. And thanks to him, they greenlit the project. We did a demo. That's when I brought Wes back on board. We did a demo. He liked the demo very much. They do have their own tech for their film, but this was a great opportunity to learn from him the things he wanted to do differently, that he wanted to do better, and it allowed us to build basically an early prototype.
Let's look at that. We have a video, and I'd like to play this, and you guys comment and explain what we're seeing. This is a video showing on the set virtual.
Yeah. So this is 2010. We got a live mocap actor, live camera going into Unity, and we got source, and we were able to do all the streaming of the characters. This is just demo content, so no association with any particular project. We just got demo content to be able to do the test. And then, as you see over the years, we were able to do different kinds of sensors as different camera sensors were evolved. So this stuff can be really portable. You can do your own camera, on a flight, if you wanted to. And then this is Randall Kleiser using it. Previously, Scott Anderson. It can run on very small devices, and this kept evolving project after project. And then Jungle Book was the first feature that got to use the full capabilities.
So you guys are literally putting the camera back in the director's hands. And what happens when you do that? What are the responses?
Well, there's a lot of hesitation. I mean, it's technology, and technology is seen as a hindrance to the creative process most of the time, because it can expand the creative process, but many times it blocks it. So when you come into productions, they're like, oh, we just want to do it the way we did it last year, right? And so, but once they get in there and they start using it, and they start realizing they can not just film it, they can change the lighting, they can reshoot it instantly, right? So in the past, you'd have to go off and render this out, wait a day, and see it the next day for dailies. There are no dailies in this kind of workflow. It's instant. It's now, So you don't get to. The directors they start falling in love with it fairly quickly.
And it's not just the speed, though, and the creativity. Like, what else happens? Like, for your set design, like this informs so many decisions in the creative process.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about some of those.
Yeah, we had some interesting surprises. Like, we worked with Alex McDowell, production designer, on a Disney project, and both Alex and I had the mindset that we thought we knew how much this tool can have an impact. And even him and I were shocked when we would see every single aspect of production that we never thought of getting impacted, including the wardrobe designer who would come and look at the set and then suddenly decide she needs to extend the dress because she never realized the ceiling was so tall, or the storyboard artist would look at this scene and say, he never realized there was such a long distance from this location to that location, so he needs to board more action. These kind of things were just happening just from the fact that people could walk up and interactively fly around the set. That simple.
Yeah. So this is a big question warning. Is this the future of filmmaking?
Filmmaking is the future of filmmaking. This is the tool that brings the art back to the artist. That's really all we're doing. We're trying to take a long, laborious process and bring it back to be an instant process. We want it so that the proverbial director can be standing there with his Super 8, and just shooting like he would if he was a kid. Yeah. That's what we want. That's why we do this. It's exactly why our company exists. We have no other purpose.
Yeah, the same thing applies for any other creative on set. On Jungle Book, Bill Pope got introduced to the idea of CG lighting in the first place, let alone real time. And then he could see how he could compose the scenes how he wanted to, even though those things didn't exist yet, right? He's looking at, the virtual animals on a monitor, but he's able to get the look and feel he wants. And he'd been hooked up at Digital Domain with the camera head that he likes. So he was familiar with what he was using, but then everything else was virtual. So it's really just another tool, but the real timeness brings back what used to be offline and days and years and months of work. Many of you have been in visual effects. Some of those shots take 6 months. It brings it back live on set, so the key creatives can make the decisions on the spot.
But it's still scary. Like, I could see directors looking at this and going, "You're taking the craft away from me." And what happens when what would you say to a director who's maybe apprehensive about doing something like this?
Do not be afraid.
No fear. Really, you take it one step at a time. You don't throw these kinds of things into a film and say, okay, we're going to replace every freaking process of your filmmaking, You come in, you find out what's taking the time, and you start there.
Yeah.
If it's previs, it's previs. That's fine, And then maybe they fall in love with the process of previs so much they start doing it in live shoots, like we did on Ready Player One. That was all that camera data went off and became part of the film. So
like literally the cameras for the film.
Yeah.
Like that exact data. I remember
Steven's hand was in those shots, and that's what I expect when I see a Steven Spielberg film. I want to feel his breath and I want to see his hand, because that's what I grew up with.
That's magic. So what happens? Tell me a story the first time you put a camera rig in, Steven's hands or a director's hands. What's the reaction?
Steven doesn't quite know this yet, but this tool he got to use in Ready Player One, it comes from him and I working together back at EA on a project called LMNO. And so I'd always show him the progress of the camera tools. And so he'd get feedback, and we'd have a little, he would edit something, we'd do it together, he would compose the camera. But little did he know, 10 years later, he's using something that, resulted from that, which is pretty cool.
You've got a story, Wes, I know you do.
About
yeah, first time, like, here, hold the puppy.
Oh. Well, actually, we're talking about Bill Pope. He's a very practical artist, and he was terrified of this engine, and but when he was done with it by the end of the film, we were told,
ended up liking it.
I was told secondhand that he said that he in this realm, that's all he ever wants to use. That's what he wants to use when he's doing digital shots.
Right. So share with us a ridiculous shot request. I mean, you can do anything now, so they're going to ask for everything. What's in everything?
Every shot request is ridiculous on set. It's just the way filmmaking is. It has to be. And the chaos of it is what we thrive on, and that's what we're building for. We build tools to manage the chaos. And so that to say that any request, is out of the ordinary, that's not true.
They're all out of the ordinary.
Yeah, that's film.
There's some crazy cool moments, like there hasn't been really anything released about the previs on Jungle Book. The movie was keyframe animated, to be clear, but Jon Favreau did spend considerable time on stage with live motion capture actors, the voice actors that were going to be part of it. And so we would be looking at 14 characters on the mocap stage, and then on the monitor you saw 7 wolves with real-time lighting. And so the two together was just an incredible moment to see that kind of, to me that was the light bulb of how far these things can go. And there was scenes where Mowgli's dodging the buffalo, and he when they put on VR goggles on him, then he could like dodge actual buffalo instead of people in blue screen running at him. Just more effective that way.
Right, and this is more than cameras. Like, you're moving things around on the set. People are asking it's the touch of God into every department.
Mm-hmm. And scale difference. So the actors could put on glasses and see each other at scale, because you had each animal had a completely different scale. Massive tiger and.
Right. Habib, I remember you mentioning on Blade Runner that Denis didn't use it just for cameras, but started using the system for other elements in the film too.
Yeah, so I was brought in by John Nelson to help with the post, and congratulations, John, wherever you are, for your Academy nomination this morning. Yeah. as well as Roger Deakins for the cinematography of the film. Both of them, and Denis were amazing to work with. So late in the process, there was a handful of shots we needed to revisualize, or there were story changes. We wanted to join certain shots. And, I had this system in my back pocket. I kind of always have it on me because it's portable. And so with help with Denis' editors, we worked out a scenario where we could re-visualize some of the shots. And so he saw those tests, he was inspired, and he said, can we try doing some together? So I booked an hour with him. Within that hour, we redid 4 shots completely, and it was entirely his performance. And one of those I'm proud of, it was the spinner shot in Trash Mesa, where all the tall ships are, all the garbage ships. And the spinner's flying and starting getting shot at, and he starts gaining altitude. And so originally the spinner was supposed to go around and up, and every time he tried it, he would crash into the ship, and he realized that's not even a possible move. And he said, well, he was just trying to gain altitude. So that's what he performed. What I did was I attached the spinner to the virtual camera. So basically wherever he was pointing it, that's where the spinner would fly. So in the film, there's a scene where you can see the spinner get altitude, and then he looks over and sees this ship with the harpoon guys on it and the little pieces of fire. So he flew the spinner for that shot. Then I put him back inside the spinner, attached him to the seat, and then he performed the camera for it, within 10 minutes. So that's one of the shots. The other one is the spinner going across the seawall and the camera rising up and seeing the ocean on the other side. These were all important story points to establish that we didn't have shots for, but we were able to do all of that in less than an hour.
That's crazy.
4 shots. Yeah.
So what's your next?
So there were shots that were being conceived, like the drone, the drone shot, or we call it pilot fish shot, in Vegas. And the traditional method of storyboarding and previs and animation splines and all these things, it took about 2 months to visualize that process. And while we were doing this cinematography, I happened to bring in the Vegas set. These were all from MPC's previs assets. I would just pop them in. And one of the things I like about Unity, just drag it in. And so he's flying inside. Wes has a very handy-dandy drone simulation engine going. But he's flying inside Vegas, and he basically said, I could have performed that shot live.
So why did you use Unity for this? For your system?
Okay, Habib actually made the original call on using Unity, but from a technological perspective, why we went that direction is because everything in I'm going to say art, everything in art changes. That's just the whole point of art, right? It changes radically. And so we had to be able to follow the changes in production. And we needed an engine that not only, was quick to ingest, new data, but we could rebuild it. And I actually fixed bugs in the code while Steven was talking to his DP, and then he got back working again. So these kinds of things can happen, right, when you're dealing with a agile engine that like this,
Yeah, the original call was being on set, especially when we started with James Cameron. I knew he would want things very quickly. That's what I heard.
Safe assumption.
Yeah. So, both of us having worked in many different projects and in the past, it's a tough thing to assimilate assets. Early Need for Speed engines, you'd wait. This is a little secret. I was like, hey, I'm gonna go away from film, and I don't have to wait for anything. Everything's real time. And then I find out I have to wait 2 hours for a build. It's a little secret that I don't tell. But engines, these platforms have come a long way, and so that was the original call,
Right.
to move quickly.
So what's your next film?
I guess we're currently working on an awesome Tom Hanks project called Greyhound. Director Aaron Schneider, and he's a big believer in the virtual domain, and so we're working with him, visualizing the film.
It's great. I tried to get more out of them. That's. I don't think you're going to say any more, are you?
Not about that one.
Not about that one. Last question. Disney. You worked on a project with Disney, and Tell us about that. You've got some stories there. And about the VR side, because I know you worked in VR with that project as well.
Right. So we've worked with a lot of groups outside of film that are on the kind of edge of film, and so Disney had a call for being able to build a system to have their designers enter into their architects enter into a virtual space and see their theme parks as they're designing them. And walk around in them and scale them and make notes in them and whatnot. And then we expanded even further and we're like, okay, now we're going to do it with people in LA. We're doing it with people in Florida and people in Tokyo, and they're all in the same environment, working together. They each have a little avatar. You can see each other. You can wave at each other, but you can more importantly is you can talk to each other. And you can point at things and go, "That's wrong," "That's right," and it's collaborative building of 3D worlds.
And are these people in literally different places around the world?
Yeah.
Sharing the same virtual space.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's even handy when you're in the same place.
Yeah.
So like on Ready Player One, you have 10 people that could change anything at the same time.
Yeah.
So that's our segue. When you've got your assets in Unity and you're open to other mediums, like you guys are doing virtual cinematography, but there's VR and AR. And that's our segue into what Natalie Grant's going to speak to you about, who's the Senior Product Marketing Manager for VR, AR, and Film and the Coco project. Welcome, Natalie.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. That was great.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Fascinating stuff, right? John and Ben, you guys can hop up. So John Halstead here has been at Pixar since 2000. He's worked on films like Finding Nemo, Cars, Up, and more. And Ben Grossman co-founded Magnopus, which if you don't know is a VR content technology company in LA. And both these guys have worked on a number of projects that have been award-winning, and I cannot think of two better people for us to chat with about what it's like to bring a story and characters from feature film into virtual reality. And not just any feature film, but a Pixar feature film. So Coco VR, this is a first of its kind in many ways. So why don't we start with how it all began?
So there's a team of people at Disney in a group called the Technology Innovation Group, and what they're responsible for is championing new technology and new forms of content across the entire Disney organization. And so I think it was the end of 2016, they came to Pixar and pitched us this idea of working with Oculus, who had expressed interest in working with Disney feature animation as well as Pixar on something. And so there has been a lot of interest at Pixar about VR and trying to understand what it is and how we can make best use of it. And so it was a really great time for TIG and Oculus to come and pitch this to us.
Ben, anything to add about how at the very beginning?
Well, sure. I mean, we'd had some successful relationship with both TIG and Oculus before, too, and we'd done a fair amount of experimentation in VR and AR. And since the pedigree and the background of our company was from the films industry and computer graphics and visual effects, it sort of made sense to help transition a little bit and work with the great teams at Pixar to try and marry these two things together and get something out there in the world. So in the early days, it was kind of like, if you're not comfortable with the real-time aspect of it, because it is a little bit of a mind twist if you're from the computer graphics world or you're from the movie industry where render times are a minimum of an hour, and sometimes in the case of Pixar movies, upwards of 80 hours per frame, times 24, times 60, times 120, like just imagine all that. And then you have to get all that stuff running super fast. There's a little bit of stuff you got to do. to get to that process. So it was a great relationship because we had a little bit of experience in interactivity, in VR, and some of the nuances and tricks of the platform and the social aspect of it. And obviously they had the expertise in amazing stories, beautiful worlds, fantastic characters. And it was a really intimidating kickoff, I think, because you're like, wait, we're going to touch that and we're going to put it over here? That's super exciting.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, too, one of the amazing things listening about how this experience came to be is that it's sort of a melding of all these people with different skill sets and different backgrounds to sort of marry these two worlds. So I just want to ask everybody in the audience, can you raise your hand if you work in primarily film, if you'd categorize yourself as film industry? All right. And can you raise your hand if you would categorize yourself as VR, AR? Okay, so we got a nice mix, a little more on the VR side. So that's great. I actually think that, hearing about how you guys took this challenge, if I can call it a challenge, and made it work is really fascinating. So let's talk about the social aspect of it. In New Frontier this year, there are many social experiences which are super awesome. Allison mentioned a lot of them at the beginning. But there's something special about Coco VR in that it encourages, families and friends to do things in a social aspect that in other experiences doesn't quite happen. It's not as magical. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think the social aspect of it is one of my favorite parts. And when Oculus came with TIG to pitch this, they expressed interest in trying to use their new social platform. And I know I hadn't had a lot of experience in VR up until then, but they had all been solo experiences. And oftentimes they would feel isolating, and after 5 minutes or so, I'd want to go ahead and take the headset off. But what was really interesting about the working with the social and Coco is that it was a ton of fun just to work on it, and we would often meet the guys down in LA inside the Coco environment and review the sets and the game mechanics, but everyone's dressed up as a skeleton, and so
no pants.
They were naked skeletons for a long time, and of course the first 5 to 10 minutes was spent playing, grabbing each other's skulls and throwing them around, and then we'd eventually get to work. But what was interesting, it wasn't isolating, and what's more, we'd lose track of time, and we'd easily spend 45 minutes to an hour doing these reviews, and we were totally focused on what was going on, and the time just flew by.
It was one of the logistical problems that we had at the beginning. It wasn't really a problem. It was like a normal way of working, where it was like, well, okay, Pixar's in the Bay Area, and Magnopus is in LA, and we're gonna have to go back and forth. Let's schedule some meetings. Let's work on a plan, and we'll fly them down and you up and back and forth. And it was like, if we just get started, we may not have to do that anymore, because you'll just be able to join us remotely, and we'll just be in the environment together. So you can stay where you are, and we'll stay where we are. And that was super fun. And all kinds of shenanigans would happen, because we didn't really have, at the time, a good system for sort of privacy, where it was like, we at Magnopus will be working over here, and you are not allowed to see what we're doing until we're ready to share it. We would just spawn up the world, and we'd be trying out new things, and then every once in a while, sometimes a skeleton would appear, and you'd be like, is that us? Is that someone up there? Because I should go get an adult if that's somebody important. And then we had it actually happen at Magnopus, where one time some of our devs were in there exploring new UXs that we were going to try out. We weren't ready to present them yet, and then a skeleton popped up and just looked around very kind of confused. And one of our people was like, hi, I'm Yussi. Who are you? And it's like, I'm Ed. Hi, Ed. Any Ed I would know? Catmo, Ed Catmo. Just wait 1 second, I'll be right back. And he takes his head off and sets it on the table, because in VR, that's what it looks like. When you take the VR headset off, it looks like the whole skeleton just slumps over on the table, and you're like, what happened to that guy? So we used to have that kind of stuff would happen all the time. But like you said, the whole social aspect of Coco was something that we had been dreaming about since the early days of Oculus, when they first came out with a prototype that was, this social experience that they would demo was just a toy box. And it almost didn't get released publicly, but the social aspect of that was one of the first things that you could get a demo of privately at Oculus. And the first time we saw a floating head and hands that was somebody else, you kind of fell in love with this other person. And you're like, yeah, I'm playing with the ray gun and throwing things and breaking stuff, but this person is cool. Like, where's this person live? It's just a blue head and hands. And it was one of the most transformative things because everybody intellectually goes, oh, yeah, VR this is a social experience. It is too antisocial. There's no collaboration. You're cut off from the world. You're isolated. And as soon as you're in VR with somebody else, you're like, actually, this is way more social than real life because I don't have any of the inhibitions of like personal space and like, oh, I have to put on pants to be in this meeting. You know, you can go into VR and be like, hey, let's like do stuff together. And not that pants is a recurring theme, but we had a lot of fun with like letting people. It's one of the essential components to doing what we wanted to do, I think, which was put the audience in the movie. And then they got to be a character, and then they got to dress themselves up, and they got to be unique, but they still got to fit into that world that came from all the brilliant production design at Pixar. And so there was a lot of stuff that we discovered about that process.
You know, I'm sorry, Natalie. Just one thing to follow up on that. You know, so at Pixar we were really looking at this as a big experiment, and we know a lot about animated movies and cinema. And so we're always using that as a comparison. And so, one thing that kind of struck me after going through the experience with a number of people is that, when you go into a theater and you watch cinema, it's a shared experience. But when people would go through this experience, it was a lot more intimate in that, you're going on an adventure. And you get to interact with each other, and there was a really special feeling that kind of came out of this social aspect and playing around in this world.
Yeah, and I'm not embarrassed to admit that my first time in Coco VR, I spent about 20 minutes at the selfie machine because I had to take a selfie with all the different hats and glasses and find out which outfit I liked best. And there's all sorts of things in Coco VR. There's a cable car you can ride. You can go to a little outdoor movie and sit with some characters and watch some short films. And there's something else that's really special that I want to talk about for a second, which is the art gallery. So John, can you tell us a little bit about why you guys put in this particular experience that added a little bit of background to the creation of the project?
Yeah, so of course, everyone sees the final product in the theaters, but they often don't get an opportunity to see all the concept art and that goes into making it. And actually, at work, we have some art galleries that rotate with each new movie just to give the art departments a chance to show off all their work. And so, as we were brainstorming, trying to figure out, what do we want to do here? One of the most obvious things is like, well, let's show off all the beautiful art from the film. And so, but let's do it as if it's in an art gallery, or actually it's a working art space that you see in the film. And so you can go around and there's actually a little educational part where you learn about some of the traditional influences for Coco, and then there are other parts where you actually see artists, actual media. And as you go through, there's little Easter eggs to find and stuff, and you can poke these buttons on these speakers that kind of give you some background behind what you're looking at, and it's a lot of fun. You can spend a lot of time in there.
It was like the thing that you would literally do if you were in Mexico. It had that aesthetic, and it had that sort of gritty first person experience kind of thing. And the funny thing was that I didn't really realize it until after it was done, that I was like, oh, we're kind of bringing the DVD behind the scenes extra features thing back. Because we did it as just part of the creative process. Like, you're in the movie, you should be able to see these things, and you should be able to have these experiences, because the movie is about artists in many ways. And so let's showcase all of those things with the cinema in the alleyway, with the musicians, with the performers, all the little things that were throughout the experience were in the character and tone of the film. And then it was only afterwards to kind of realize, like, oh, it's like the DVDs used to have, where you can go behind the scenes, and film aficionados could really do that, except it's so much better because you didn't realize you were doing it until you were done. And then you went, oh, I just went inside the movie and saw the behind the scenes of making the movie in a way that was fun, had Easter eggs, there's little hidden stuff all over the place, and the artwork is fantastic. And I feel like you get to appreciate it so much more than, like, I'm in my living room, behind the scenes and boop. And like, oh, this is a slideshow. That's neat. It's like you're standing in front of an artist's easel, and like behind the curtain, you're seeing an artist working, and you're there one to one. And that sense of presence is not, it's not a trivial impact. It's huge.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to circle back in particular to something that you both were mentioning earlier, which is when it comes to the technological aspect of using Unity and taking characters that had been created for feature film and bringing them into virtual reality and trying to maintain that frame rate. So can you speak a little bit more about how you tackled some of those challenges?
It was super easy. We just dragged and dropped from Pixar's pipeline right into Unity, and then we just hit play, and
He's being sarcastic.
He's kidding.
Yeah, so there's the big challenge there, of course, is we're starting from film assets that have been lovingly crafted with all sorts of detail, and they can't be rendered at a 90th of a second. So I guess you could think of kind of breaking the problem down into, at least in terms of realizing the Coco world, is it environments and then the characters. And with the environments, we just threw the actual final modeled assets over to these guys, God bless them, and they decimated it and got them perform it. And then we also, since we're not a game company, we don't follow a lot of game conventions, and so we don't have a bunch of UVs on our sets. And so in order just to get all the texture and lighting detail on there, we ended up rendering out 360s of different areas in the sets, and then the brains down at Magnopus had a real-time shader that would figure out, based on where you're at, what is the best 360 render to use, and project that onto the geometry.
Certainly these are very high-resolution assets. Like, I don't think we've ever really seen anything that is quite so complete. In the original days, I think there was a lot of intimidation, both at the studio level, at Pixar's, and even at Magnopus. We were like, are we sure we should be doing this? Because they sent us some assets to look at, and there was a set, and in the set was a shelf and a million other shelves, and on the shelves were a million books. And then when we got the book and we opened it up, there were pages, and on each page there were pictures. And that's a lot of detail, and we're not sure if we should be doing this. And everyone's like, no, we'll figure it out. Like, we got this sorted out. And so everyone was super excited, and I think it was only from the collaboration. I mean, first of all, some of this company comes from the films business, and so we spoke the same language, but the majority of the company comes from the real-time engine world, where they were able to help bridge all this. And so it was only with all of us working together that we could say, okay, we'll do a little thing. You go into RenderMan, you'll render out those 360s, and then we'll reproject those 360s and write a shader that dynamically picks what pixel is appropriate on what piece of geometry from those renders, so you have dynamic lighting, but not really. And then we'll do the sky like this, and we'll have sprites for that. And it was like every trick in the book got thrown at that, because the irony was, you need to have this beautiful experience in order to feel like you're in the movie. The whole goal is feel like you're in the movie. And if it looks like a cartoon version of the movie, it's not the movie. And so we needed to do that. But if you're into VR, you know that the sense of presence and the interactivity, it's not like a movie. Movies are, in many cases, passive. But in VR, everything is active. And the things that are active are more valuable than the things that are passive. And so we needed the passive things to look amazing, but we needed enough render budget to come back with all this interactivity. And if you've gone into Coco, you see that John can make a character with a mustache, and I can steal his mustache and throw it on the ground and grab a hat and put it on John. And then if we get into a fight, John can take my head off and throw it out of the train. And like all of these kinds of very intimate pass-off assets and interactivity have to happen. And there's bandwidth, there's compute power required to support those things happening so quickly that I don't feel a delay like when we try to rip each other. I mean, in early builds, we could actually like take somebody's arm and be like, I got your arm, and then run around. And there's like fun games you can play like that, but they have to be so fast, but everything still has to look good. So there was a lot of budgeting and a constant iterative process of, these are the most optimal ways to make things look good. This is the fastest way to get these rigs working. This is the best way to get the animation from Pixar into those characters so that they look like the characters from the film. and they'd move like the characters from the film, but still give up to at least 4 people the ability to do crazy things with themselves and all be running around unleashing pandemonium on the universe.
Yeah, and just to talk about characters real quick. Another one of the huge challenges was realizing these characters in this environment, and we have proprietary software at Pixar where the way we rig our characters is with deformer networks and not with the type of bones that typical game engines will support. And so there was a bit of R&D going into setting up some bones on these characters, having them track the deforming meshes, and then getting that down to Magnopus. And then we spent a lot of time trying to get the facial animation transferred onto bones, and ultimately had to punt on that since that's still kind of an R&D problem right now. And I think what we ended up doing is just per frame blend shapes for those hero character moments.
So when I rewatch movies, which I do a lot, I'm sure you guys do too, one of the main reasons I do that is because I just want to be back there. I just want to be back in the world. I want to be back with those characters. I feel like I'm emotionally invested in them. And so, I was just so delighted that Pixar was, doing VR. And you guys saw the hands that went up earlier, so I'm sure everyone's dying to know this. And Wes, I love what you said, filmmaking is the future of filmmaking. I wanted to ask you guys, is this a turning point for the film industry?
I can't even really speak for Pixar, but I'll attempt it. And I think there is interest, and this project opened up a lot of eyes at the company. That said, we have decades of experience with doing animated movies, and that's where our focus is right now. And so I think it remains to be seen. We will continue to do more VR projects. Some will be probably internal, and others may be external. But I think it sparked even more of an interest at the company. So yeah, it may have a future.
It might not be a turning point, but it may be a broadening point. I think that there are these multiple parallel paths for cinema where you have what's classically called an animated feature, and you have a live action feature. And then as live action starts to include more visual effects, do we have a name for that? Well, we still call it a live action feature, but it's mostly computer generated. But like in the case of Jungle Book, it's like, well, the boy is real. Does that make it a live action movie, or is it an animated movie? Like, we don't really know. And we don't really need to know necessarily, because the description of the medium comes from the audience. Like, my daughter doesn't have any questions about whether it's an animated movie or a live action movie. She's like, this is the real one, and that's the cartoon one, or that's the animated 3D one, and this one is it's a mixture. I don't know, but I watch that one. And so I think we know that the ability to bring real-time engines into the creative process and remove the barriers of complexity and nerdery that kind of get in the way of traditional free-flowing creative has an impact on broadening the capabilities of what the audience can do. We saw with what Chris is doing with Oates, and we saw with what Wes and Habib have been doing with other filmmakers in the live action environment. And we know that though we can't talk about it today, there are $200 million movies now getting shot completely in VR and in real-time engines that will have a very significant impact on how movies in cinema get into the box office and what they look like. So I think we may not be, maybe no reason to turn, but we're broadening the capabilities of what this is. And actually, Coco, in many cases, is sort of the first step towards this concept of movies becoming worlds instead of the master deliverable, so to speak. Because if you talk to many of the great filmmakers, they create worlds, and then from that they extract a linear story. But now that we see filmmakers like Pixar and everybody else start to experiment with, well, actually just build the world. And what Wes and Habib have done is put the filmmakers in the world to shoot the movie. And what we're doing with Coco is putting the audience in the world too. At some point, like, hey, maybe movies expand beyond just that definition, and storytelling and narrative all come into question, and interesting things starts to happen. So I don't think it's a turning point. I think it's a broadening of scope and definition.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, you guys. Give them a round of applause. John and Ben.